Hey, Chicago Fire and Major League Soccer fans. Welcome back to the Feed the Fire podcast. I'm your host, Nick, and in episode 53, we are recapping the Chicago Fire's 0-0 draw at Montreal. We are previewing the Chicago Fire's midweek match against the offensive powerhouse of the Columbus Crew, and I'm going to do my absolute best not to completely break down and cry about the Chicago Fire. All this and more after this. Well, Fire fans, here we are in a familiar place talking about another draw that feels like a loss. And if you've been following along with this podcast since the beginning, one of our earlier episodes titled Draws That Feel Like Losses, I released that after the Fire played Toronto FC to a 0-0 draw. That was back on May 31st. And I'm thinking, how do we not score against the team with no defense, and the DPs don't even want to be there? They're fighting with the coach, all this sort of thing. And here we are again talking about a 0-0 draw for the Chicago Fire after another trip to Canada. And that is why I have called this episode for you Draws That Feel Like Losses Part 2, or maybe I should call it Part 2, since they're coming from Montreal. But guys, looking at this matchup, this was essentially a playoff game for the Chicago Fire. Like, if they didn't start to raise their game and get some better results than just, close losses or these draws, they're going to start falling further and further out of that playoff picture and further below that playoff line. So what do? We've talked about this. The Fire have talked about it. We have to play better. We have to do more. We have to create chances. But so what do they go out and do? They have another abysmal offensive performance and have to rely on teenage goalkeeper Chris Brady to bail them out. Another draw that feels like a loss. Let's get into the details here. First of all, it was a bad lineup, and a lot of the blame for this game, for this poor result, falls on the coaching staff. Also on the front office, because I know this team has no depth. It's starters. Gosh, if you're a playoff team right now, if you're like top 4 or 5 in your conference in Major League Soccer, if you're Cincinnati, if you are Orlando, if you're Seattle, LAFC, St. Louis, which one player on the Chicago Fire roster would you take to replace any one of your players on your team? I mean, maybe Chris Brady. That's all I can think of at this point. Like, none of the strikers are scoring. Maybe you would take Pineda to come off the bench for you. Maybe you'd take Chihos if you needed some help in the back. Maybe. And maybe Gutierrez, but I think a lot of these top teams, their midfields are set. I don't think that any starter on the Chicago Fire would be starting for any other club with the exception of Chris Brady. And that's a bold statement. I'm going to stand by it, and I want to hear what your thoughts are on that. Email me, glasshouseSoccer@gmail.com, or hit me up on Twitter or X, @GlassHouseSoccer. Direct messages are open. So, again, looking at the lineup, we know the team has no depth. We know the team has no stars. We know that the coaching staff doesn't know what to do with this roster. But I'll tell you something. You don't have to look any further back than just a couple months ago when you beat Montreal 3-0. But what do the Fire do? They go completely away from that. Here were the differences between the two starting lineups in their matches against Montreal. Recently, you had Kamara as your starting striker for Yorgos Koutsias. And Koutsias, speaking of the young Greek talent, he didn't even get subbed in until the 89th minute. You're chasing 3 points on the road here. Like, you need these 3 points not only for your own playoff standing, but to keep this exact Montreal team behind you in the standings. And they don't sub in a striker until the 89th minute. What are they doing over there? What is going through these coaches' heads? Assuming anything is going through their heads. But anyway, back to the lineup, right? We see Kamara get the start for Koutsias as opposed to that last game against Montreal. And again, this is shocking because it was Koutsias who had the assist as well as generating the play that led to the second goal for the Chicago Fire. So the fact that he wasn't in this matchup just blows my mind. Also, you saw Fabian Herbers in for Xherdan Shaqiri as an attacking midfielder, and then Ousmane Doumbia gets Herbers as defensive midfield spot. So kind of a little double switch there from what we saw the last time they played Montreal. One thing, if you like analytics, if you really want to look at some of the advanced kind of metrics and figures and things, I tweeted out a link or tweeted out a chart about the passing charts of the Chicago Fire in this game. And if you look at Chris Brady's goal kicks, his mid to long goal kicks to his left were just about all completed passes. But his mid to kind of long range goal kicks to his right, to Doumbia's side, none of them were completed passes. So Doumbia is not a player. He's not an MLS level player, or whatever role he had for Lugano in Switzerland. He is not finding it here with the Fire, or it is not the role the Fire need. Yes, he was third in the Swiss league in tackles won, and supposedly he was a good passer as well, passing out of the back. But we have seen none of that here with the Chicago Fire. He can't hack it in MLS, and the fact that he doesn't even stand out on the Chicago Fire team is even more damning and more bad evidence against him. But anyway, we see Kamara in for Koutsias. We see Herbers and Doumbia in for Shaqiri and Herbers. And we see Alonso Aceves in for Miguel Navarro. Now, Aceves and Navarro, from a defensive standpoint, I think are a little comparable. And I think the Chicago Fire really wanted Aceves to step up. So maybe they didn't have to re-sign Miguel Navarro, who's probably going to want a little bit more money than he's making this year. But Aceves does not have that offense that Miguel Navarro has shown in spurts when he gets forward, if he gets forward. Navarro at least gives you one good cross a game. Meanwhile, Aceves was completely lacking on that. So, again, in a game where the Fire needed to treat it like a playoff game, when they could have really separated themselves from another team right in the middle of the pack with them, right almost equal in the standings with them, they put in their aging striker who can't go 90 and don't sub him out until the 89th minute. I'm sorry. Maybe they did sub Kai out, but Koutsias doesn't come in. They don't bring in their young striker until the 89th minute. You have Doumbia, who can't generate offense, Aceves, who can't generate offense, and Herbers, who is not an offensive player, also playing an attacking mid position. So whoever came up with this starting lineup should be immediately terminated, shown the door. Don't let it hit you on the butt on the way out. Good night, whatever coach this was. Honestly, I really think there are people in that building, and if you want to go conspiracy theory with the league influencing whatever, somebody wants Kai Kamara to move up into second place on the all-time scoring chart, past Landon Donovan. And it would have been a great story, right, for him to get one of those goals at his former club at Montreal, where he left under not the best terms. But yeah, they definitely tried to make it happen, despite the fact that Kamara playing for that long in that game is a detriment to the team. And you're going to hear a little bit more about that from our featured guest during our halftime break. So those are my comments about this lineup. Now, if you want to look at the statistics, because the Chicago Fire did nothing, and if you looked at some of the heat maps of the Chicago Fire passing, I think one time they actually played the ball into the opposing 18-yard box, or at least had some possession or some touch in Montreal's 18-yard box. They mostly had possession in their own half. They could, if you look at the passing charts, they could not figure out how to move the ball forward. A lot of lateral movement with the Chicago Fire passing. But do the statistics bear that out? And in this case, I really think they do. Chicago only had 48% possession, 11 shots, 4 on goal, 3. They ended up blocking 3 shots defensively. 400 total passes. That is a large number of passes relative to some of their other matches, and they completed about 82.5% of those passes, which tends to agree with, or which does suggest that these passes are being completed in their own defensive half when there's not a lot of pressure, especially from a Montreal team. And again, the ball was in their own half, only 2 corners. 12 crosses, which is a little bit lower for the Chicago Fire team, only 3 offsides. They are not getting forward. They're not trying to push that back line. You know, you want to think back to the days the last Fire made the playoffs with Nemanja Nikolic winning a Golden Boot. That guy probably had, oh gosh, how many goals did he have? 20-some goals? He probably had 50 or 60 offsides that season as well. Not stretching the back line. Now, but that's not the way the Fire want to play. They want to bring the ball up and cross it. But as we said, they're not even doing that. They're just happy to move the ball laterally. 10 tackles won to Montreal's 8. Brady was credited with 4 saves. The defense had 19 clearances. There were 12 fouls, 3 yellow cards, one of which Fabian Hervers for just spouting his mouth off. Again, I'll let John Donovan address that because as a former professional soccer player in Venezuela, he knows a thing or two about spouting off to a referee and how detrimental that is to your team. Because not only are you getting a yellow card, and now you have to change your game, you can't be as aggressive in certain circumstances, but now the referee got a pretty bad taste in his mouth about the attitude of the Chicago Fire. And honestly, that's something that we talked about last season that came to bite them and is back again this year. At least there were no red cards. At least there were no red cards, which, by the way, the Fire are tied for the lead in MLS with 5 red cards on the season. I think there's 4 other teams that also have 5 red cards. Now, if you like expected goals, apparently the Chicago Fire don't, because they only had 0.4 expected goals off of their 11 shots. And from what I saw on the shooting chart, the Fire didn't actually have a shot until the 44th minute of the game. And their best opportunity came from Marin Haile Selassie in first half stoppage time. And what was that percent chance of converting to score? 8% chance. Their best shooting opportunity, their best scoring opportunity only gave them an 8% chance. That is, again, some terrible offense. But here we are, just repeating ourselves. I feel like a broken record. So my impressions of this match, it was another underwhelming performance, lacked any sort of passion or desire from the players to actually go out and win this game. Both from Montreal and the Chicago Fire side of things, this game needed a player to step up and really take control of it, and nobody did it. So we talked lineups, we talked stats, but like just my general impression here, nobody on that Fire team wants to actually play to win, except for Chris Brady, who was rewarded by the league by getting team of the match day. So he was the top goalkeeper of this match day and absolutely deserved it. So he had so many like point blank saves late in that game and just commanding his box. As I mentioned before, again, kind of talking some general impressions, this was like a playoff game for all intents and purposes. And the Fire treated it like a preseason warm-up. Klopas, interim manager Frank Klopas, in a post-game interview, he seemed to suggest that this point on the road with Montreal was acceptable, and the team had a great performance. He was quoted as saying they had a great performance, and maybe this is why they're playing with such apathy. Their interim manager is okay with their mediocrity. I mean, he might as well have given up. You saw him after that blowout in DC look really frustrated and angry and upset, and you saw him almost getting to that point in the prior game that against Vancouver. Now he's just talking. He's just saying coach speak. He's just giving the regular canned answers. You know, a point on the road, you know, is something, you know, when you're fighting for your playoff spots, a point on the road is acceptable. And, you know, the team played really hard and it was a great performance, you know, Chris, and then he talked about Chris Brady for a little bit. Like he doesn't even know what to do. He doesn't even have anything new to say. So I'm for managers staying positive and putting out positive vibes, but this is not positive vibes. This is just canned responses and just sheer obliviousness to what's going on within his locker room, or he just doesn't care. And that might be the worst thing. Like if he doesn't care, you can see the players don't care. And honestly, one of the biggest things that showed me that Klopas doesn't care was back during the All-Star break when it was announced that Don Garber's one of his 2 commissioners' picks was Kai Kamara to the All-Star game. And the way Klopas announced it, it was just like an afterthought, like a footnote on his session that his locker room session, or his meeting session, that he was running. Oh, and by the way, we've got some great news. Kamara is an all-star. Nobody even clapped. Like, he didn't build it up. He didn't have anything fun planned. And the teammates of Kai Kamara didn't even clap for him. So this sentiment has been brewing and has been part of the Chicago Fire locker room for the bulk of this season, and it's really coming to a head on this 4-game goalless losing, or I should say winless streak. One other really bit of interesting news, we can stop talking about the Chicago Fire's failings. Some really interesting, funny, like pure Major League Soccer news came out of Montreal today, Monday the 18th. Midfielder Matko Miljevic has been terminated from Montreal. MLS has terminated his contract for engaging in conduct detrimental to the league and violating his standard player agreement. And that is the official statement for Major League Soccer. But everything we're hearing out of Montreal is that Miljevic signed up for an amateur league. I heard it might have been an indoor league, used a fake name, and then gets into a fight with another player, punches him, and as a result, it all comes out who he really is, and it gets back to to CF Montreal, and they have to dismiss him. Now they won't miss him much. He was more of a depth piece. Only 8 appearances this season, but here's the thing: he was signed as a U22 initiative signing in 2021, and so you can see like those are the spots where the clubs who are doing it right are getting their U22 initiative signings to contribute, or they're building them up and selling them off, and that's where they're making some transfer fee money, right? So Montreal completely whiffed on Miljevic's signing here. He had, I think, 22 appearances last season and only a handful in his first season with Montreal. And again, only 8 appearances this season so far. So it was probably best that they found a reason to get rid of him. And man, did they move quick. It wasn't even like an investigation or he's been suspended from team activities until we can find something inclusive. Nope, he was gone. He was gone. Either the evidence was so overwhelming or they really needed to get rid of him or both. So Montreal now has to look to see who they can bring in as a new U22 initiative, as a young DP player to help bolster their roster. Now, with that, we come to our halftime break. I want to remind everyone that Feed the Fire is sponsored by Skira Icelandic Spring Water. Icelandic for clear. Skira water comes from a spring in a government-protected nature preserve in Iceland with naturally low mineral content. This isn't your average water. Clearly, pun intended, it's one of the best. And at halftime on the show, we always turn it over on the podcast side of things to our featured guest, John Donovan, who's got some strong thoughts on the Chicago Fire's lineup and play. And on the YouTube side, we are going to just pause while we splice in that great Donovan commentary over on the podcast. So take it away, John. Well, John, thank you so much for always supporting our show, for giving your analysis, for giving your takes, and just for letting us know how you do really feel about the Chicago Fire. John, also, when I had a conversation off-wire kind of talking about Bruce Arena and the situation with the New England Revolution and everything that has gone on there. And, you know, we talked about it a little bit in our last episode, and I think that story has been really well covered by kind of mainstream MLS media, as well as a lot of the secondary MLS media, fan accounts, bloggers, things of that nature. And essentially, Bruce Arena was dismissed after he wasn't dismissed. He was being investigated. He was suspended, and then he resigned after being accused of saying detrimental and harmful and insulting things. I forget the exact phrase that Major League Soccer used. But then as a result of it, his assistant coach, who had made the complaint, was promoted to interim manager. 2 other assistants walked out. The players refused to hold a training session until they got some more clarity of what exactly was going on. And I think my whole point was the MLS needs to do a little better job communicating these circumstances, because they just said, we're investigating him for things he said. He's been suspended. He's now resigned. The coaching staff's walked out and the players are refusing to train. What's going on? What was he actually said? What exactly are your responsibilities to the league when you're and your obligations to the league when you're a coach, when you're a staffer, when you're a player? You know, we saw with Miljevic here how he violated standards of the league by going and playing for an amateur league. Now that's pretty, I think I'd say common knowledge or pretty reasonable to expect. Yeah, don't go play for another team. But what exactly do they mean by these things? We hardly have any examples of it. And when we had prior examples of players using racist language, all it was they used language against the policies of the league, or it was alleged to have used derogatory statements. Again, there's no examples of it given, and I get maybe you don't want to repeat specific things, but the league needs to do a better job laying these things out and saying this is acceptable, this is not acceptable. This is what Bruce Arena was alleged to have said. This is what our investigation found. And as an attorney, I get those investigations saying there's credible evidence, but it could not be substantiated. I can appreciate the league coming to such conclusions like that. But in this case, with Miljevic, in Bruce Arena's case, I'd like to know a little bit more about exactly what provisions the league is saying they violated, what actually was said and done, and have a little bit more transparency. I'd like it as a fan, and obviously the Revs players would have liked to hear about it as members of that organization, because then they came out and lost to the worst team in the league, the Colorado Rapids. So clearly that was on their minds. Now, we are going to turn our attention for the second half of this show, previewing the Chicago Fire's next match, a Wednesday night midweek matchup, September 20th, 6:30 p.m. kick at Lore.com Field in Columbus, facing off against the offensive juggernaut of the Columbus Crew. And what do I mean when I say offensive juggernaut? They lead the league in goals scored with 57. Now St. Louis and Seattle have 56. Philly is the fourth highest scoring team with 49 goals. 48 of their goals have come inside the 18-yard box. They are moving the ball forward. They are getting good crosses in. They are finding overloads. They are getting into dangerous areas. They are doing everything that the Fire aren't when it comes to having good offense. So again, 57 goals on the season, 48 inside the 18. I don't even think a stellar Chris Brady performance is going to save Chicago from this one. The dynamic for Columbus has changed a little bit with Zelarayan's departure, but again, the rest of the team has picked it up. They still have their main principles, and while Zelarayan did play a lot more direct and up the middle, they bring in Julian Gressel to kind of to provide some wing play as well. The Columbus is still creating chances. When you have 57 goals at this point in the season, you're creating chances any way you want to. You're not just becoming one-dimensional. Additionally, the Crew leads the league with 65 assists. And if you have 65 assists on 57 goals, yes, MLS is counting double assists here, or secondary assists, I should say. And this isn't close. Orlando is the next best team with 53 assists, and Atlanta is third with 52. So it's great to see the Eastern Conference atop those three. Those three teams are all in the East atop the assist category, but still, it is Columbus leading the way by far, really creating it. And their best player by far, Cucho Hernandez, who's already got a double-double on the season, 10 goals and 11 assists. So the offense all runs through him at some point. And if the Fire can shut him down, maybe they'll have a chance against Columbus if Brady can stand on his head again. But we have seen the Fire struggle against the better teams and their better players. We saw Christian Benteke pick apart the Chicago Fire's defense when DC was in town. We saw Facundo Torres pick apart the Chicago Fire defense when Orlando was in town. We saw what Gauld and White did for Vancouver, just running right down the throat of the Chicago Fire midfield and defense. And Montreal maybe didn't do it because their strikers aren't on that level of playoff MLS teams. Again, as Chicago Fire fans, we know how good or not good Chinonso Ofor is. But Opoku had a number of opportunities in this game to win it for Montreal, but just couldn't find the back of the net. So I am worried that the Chicago Fire, I'm expecting the Chicago Fire to not be able to handle Cucho Hernandez. Also on the defensive side of the ball, Aiden Morris's 52 tackles is tied for second in MLS. So the Crew, not exactly known lately for their defense. They do have some defensive acuity here. Now, before we get into the odds and predictions, here's a little trivia just to set the tone for this Columbus match, courtesy of MLSsoccer.com. Columbus is unbeaten in 13 straight regular season home matches against the Fire, 9 wins and 4 draws. The longest home unbeaten run against any team in Columbus's MLS history. The last time Chicago won in Columbus was a 2-1 victory a decade ago in June 2013. Yikes. Also, Chicago has gone 4 straight regular season matches without a goal for the 4th time since October 2021. So, in a 2-year span, the Chicago Fire have gone without a goal for 4 games 4 times. Wow, there is no offense in this city. The Fire have never gone 5 straight league matches without scoring in their MLS history. So, I don't know. How do you want to look at that one, Fire fans? Do you think so we're due for a goal, we're going to score, or nope, we're going to set some more negative history here and have our first ever 5-match scoreless streak? A little bit of positive trivia here. Brian Gutierrez was involved in more than half of Chicago's 11 shots, 3 shots, 3 chances created, against Montreal on Saturday. Gutierrez is the only Fire player with at least 30 shots and 30 chances created this season. He's got 37 shots and 32 chances created. And I have criticized Brian Gutierrez for not shooting the ball enough and for not having the courage and not having maybe the confidence to have a rip from 20, 25 yards out, or instead of laying it off when he's within the 18 to really try and take a defender one-on-one and get a shot off. I still believe that, and I still think that's very true, and I just think this is another data point that is just damning of the Chicago Fire's offensive capabilities, that the guy that I am saying needs to do more and shoot more and create more is shooting the most and creating the most on the Chicago Fire team. Odds and predictions. What are the betting odds for this match? Well, according to FanDuel, and again, this is as of Monday the 18th, the Crew are heavy favorites. They're at minus 185. Meanwhile, the Chicago Fire, I don't think I've seen odds this bad since like LAFC was on their record-setting point season, and they were playing like a just an atrocious San Jose team or some like bottom feeding team. The Chicago Fire are at plus 420. This is one of the worst odds that I've ever seen. The draw is even that bad. It's at plus 340. So essentially, it's just how much, according to the betting lines, how many goals are the Crew going to win by? That's essentially what you're looking at in this match. And as for my pick, I have seen nothing to make me think that the Fire can play well. And also, there's a little bit of that extra motivating factor here. The Columbus Crew were up 3-1 against Orlando City their last match, going into the 70th minute, and they ended up losing 4-3. They gave up 2 goals in the last 10 minutes to go from 3-2 to 4-3, right? And again, 3 goals in the last 20 minutes plus stoppage time. So it was not a solid performance from the Crew, not being able to see this goal out. And as one of our Crew fans and supporters of this show, Connor Knows Soccer, said, like, the Crew are going to be out for blood. They're going to want to erase that loss to Orlando. They're going to want some redemption against the Chicago Fire team. That being the case, where I see this game possibly being competitive is if the Fire can come out and steal a quick goal, and if the Crew have rotated their squad a little bit to rest their starters. I don't want to say underestimating the Fire, because I don't know if you can underestimate the Fire right now, but underestimate the Fire, rotate their squad a little bit, sit back and say, nah, we're really not too worried about this game. And the Fire can get a one or two goals in the first half and then really scrap it out in the second half. I think that's the only scenario where the Fire come away with at least a point in this one. However, I think it's an extremely unlikely scenario given everything we've talked about and given how good the Crew are. And I am picking the Crew to win this one 3-0. Sorry, Fire fans. I make picks with my head. I cheer with my heart. And right now I'm making a pick. And of course, come kickoff, I'm going to be saying, let's go Fire. Vamos Fire. Let's go Pame Fire. But we'll see what actually bears out. Now, just to close on a personal note, I have mentioned that I have picking up the coaching mantle, that I am leading my son's second grade U8 team every weekend on the pitch. We picked up our first win of the season. We now are 1 win and 1 draw. We had a great 6-1 victory. The kids played their hearts out. I love to see it. I'm going to talk up my son a little bit here. He may be the center mid of the future. I think this is where I think we worked on 2-touch passing on practice, where it's 1 touch to trap, 1 touch to pass, move the ball quickly, especially in their age group when there is a lot of herd ball and kids are just packing together and you're just kicking away at brick walls essentially. And that's exactly what he was doing. He was getting the ball and trying to play it through to his striker or play it out wide to his winger. 2-touch passing. I loved it. He was all over the field. He in a good way. He's making recovery runs. He's supporting his striker. He was all over. I think he might have a career as a midfielder here. Maybe a bit of a D mid, but he wants to still score some goals. But he's 8. I get it. And honestly, if anyone out there is familiar with the Chicago Fire Discovery Camps, this new thing that they're promoting where you can get U8 and U10 kids. It's kind of like an informal tryout for the academy system, just kind of get noticed by some people in the Chicago Fire organization. If anyone out there has participated in these, or if anyone out there has an inside scoop on it or knows someone who works there, I'd love to hear about it. I'd love to kind of share a little bit more of that information and present more youth in the Chicago area with opportunities to get noticed by the club. So please reach out to me, glasshousesoccer@gmail.com, or on Twitter @glasshousesoccer. And with that, I want to thank you all for tuning in and listening. Follow on Spotify, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, subscribe and like on YouTube. And as always, let's go Fire.